The Hollow House. A cursed home in a forgotten town swallows those who dare enter, and I recount the story of one such man who never returned unchanged. My name is Andrew Stephen. I am 60 years old, and the stories I share are not inventions, but things I have heard, gathered, or witnessed in my lifetime. Some were told to me in whispers, others in fear, yet all are true to those who lived them. Tonight, I bring you one such tale. Marrow's End was a small town that lived more on rumor than prosperity. By 1874, the sawmill was fading, the railroad had bypassed it, and the young were leaving for brighter places. Yet one thing gave the town its place in hushed conversation beyond its borders: the hollow house at the end of Ashwood Lane. The house had stood longer than anyone could recall. Its records were lost, its builders unnamed. It rose 3 stories high, its crapboards blackened by time, its windows dull and blind, its roof lines sagging like a weary spine. The chimney leaned like a crooked finger pointing to the heavens. No one had dwelt there since 1851, when the Fletcher family vanished without a trace. Their beds were unmade, their clothes untouched, their supper plates still warm on the table. The neighbors found the home empty, its silence thick as a grave. After that, the place became a wound in the town's memory. Children dared each other to touch its door. Women crossed themselves when they passed. Men too proud to show fear avoided Ashwood Lane after dusk. All but one. Elias Harrow, 32, a widower hardened by years at the mill, scoffed at the town's superstition. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair already touched with gray, his eyes sharp with a man's pride. To him, ghosts were stories for children, not men. "Ghosts don't build houses," Elias declared one autumn evening at Widow Mallory's tavern. "Men do, and if men built it, then there's nothing in those walls that can frighten me." The tavern quieted. Old Thomas Greaves, the blacksmith, shook his head. "You won't last an hour in there. That place has a hunger. It keeps what it takes." Elias laughed, though the firelight caught shadows beneath his eyes. "I'll stay the night, and tomorrow I'll return here and drink to your fears." That night, with only a lantern in hand, he walked down Ashwood Lane alone. The autumn wind carried the smell of smoke and damp earth. The townsfolk who watched from the square saw his figure swallowed by the darkness, his lantern bobbing like a will-o'-the-wisp until it disappeared behind the hollow house. No man had ever entered that house and lived to speak of it. Elias Harrow would be the first, or so he believed. When Elias Harrow vanished into the dark, the people of Marrow's End returned to their homes with unease clinging to them like a damp cloak. Few admitted it, but many stood at their windows late into the night, watching for the return of his lantern down Ashwood Lane. None saw it. The next morning, Widow Mallory's tavern filled with murmurs. Men shuffled in with their coats still damp from the river mist, women carrying baskets lingered near the doorway, and children pressed their ears to the tavern walls. Everyone waited for Elias. Everyone waited for laughter at their expense. But the tavern's door never swung open to admit him. Old Thomas Greaves was the first to speak aloud what others feared. "He's gone," he muttered into his mug, the words thick with dread. "The hollow house has taken him, just as it took the Fletchers, and just as it's taken others who weren't wise enough to leave well enough alone." The room stirred at that, whispers darting back and forth like restless mice. Names were spoken: farmers, travelers, even a peddler who had vanished decades before. The house had always been hungry. But a younger man, Samuel Kitt, only 20 and still burning with the pride of youth, scoffed. "You'd make yourselves fools with this talk. Elias has likely gone on to the next town, or sought work elsewhere. Not every missing man is swallowed by shadows." Yet his voice lacked conviction. He would not meet anyone's gaze. Widow Mallory, who had lived longer than most and remembered more than she wished, set down her rag and spoke with quiet authority. "The Hollow House does not let go what it takes. Mark me, if Elias Harrow has crossed that threshold, he will not cross it again, at least not as himself." The words silenced the room. Even Samuel bowed his head. For the rest of that day, people tried to busy themselves, at the mill, at the forge, in the fields, but Ashwood Lane drew their eyes again and again. By twilight, no one dared step closer to it. The door of the Hollow House remained ajar, its darkness gaping like a mouth that had swallowed something whole. The town carried on, yet every creak in the night, every gust of wind rattling a shutter, seemed to carry Elias's name, and though no one said it aloud, many dreamed the same dream that night. A lantern glowing faintly in a black window, and a man's voice whispering from within. Elias Harrow had entered the Hollow House. What awaited him there would unravel not only his fate, but the fears of Marrow's End itself. By the second night, the absence of Elias Harrow could no longer be explained away. At first, some told themselves he had sought work in a neighboring town, or perhaps taken ill on the road. But as the hours stretched into a full day, and as dusk returned to Marrow's End, fear rooted itself deep. Children were kept indoors, shutters were fastened tightly, and Ashwood Lane lay deserted. The Hollow House, looming at the far edge of town, seemed to grow larger as shadows lengthened, as though it drew its strength from the fading of the sun. Its open door gaped wide like the mouth of a waiting beast. That night, a lantern's glow was seen flickering near the threshold. No man or woman could later agree on who carried it, for none dared step near. Some swore it was Elias himself, returning at last. Others whispered it was something else entirely, a light not of this world, beckoning the living to follow. Inside the house, Elias's boots had left their mark. Thick dust covered the floors, untouched for decades, yet now bore the trail of his heavy steps. They led through the narrow hallway, past the parlor where furniture slumbered beneath gray sheets, into the dining room where the great oak table stood waning. Upon its surface gleamed a single fork, silver, polished, impossibly clean, as though it had been set only moments before. Elias's footprints continued upward. The staircase groaned beneath his weight, the hollow sound carrying like a warning through the dark holes. The wallpaper curled from the walls, its roses and vines crawling with mold. The very air seemed to breathe, heavy with mildew and a copper tang sharp as blood. At the far end of the upper hall stood a closed door. From beyond it, faint as a dying breath, came a sound. A whisper. A man's voice, low and wavering. None could later say what it spoke. Some claimed it called a name, others swore it pleaded for help, but each who dared describe it agreed on this. It was not the voice of any living man. No one in Marrow's End entered the Hollow House that night. No one opened that door to discover what lay within. The townsfolk huddled in their beds, haunted by dreams of Elias's lantern swaying in black windows, of voices calling from the dark. By dawn, it was no longer a question of whether Elias had returned. The truth had settled in the hearts of the people like frost. Elias Harrow belonged now to the Hollow House, just as the Fletchers had, and all who came before. And in Marrow's End, it was said in whispers for years after, that once the hollow house took a soul, it never released it whole again. The hollow house had a history older than anyone alive in Marrow's End dared speak of openly. The story of Elias Harrow's disappearance stirred memories long buried, forcing the townsfolk to revisit events they had tried to forget. Andrew Stephen, the narrator, would later piece together these fragments, assembling them into the tale that became whispered lore. The house had been built in the early 1800s by a man named Jonathan Holloway, a reclusive carpenter whose lineage was said to be intertwined with misfortune. Holloway's neighbors often remarked upon the eerie quality of his work: staircases that creaked with a mind of their own, doors that never fit perfectly, windows that reflected movement where none existed. Holloway himself disappeared one winter, leaving the house complete but empty, a vessel waiting for the next unfortunate soul. Decades later, the Fletcher family moved in, unaware of the house's reputation. They were prosperous farmers, bright-eyed and naive, with 3 children. Within weeks, strange occurrences began. Footsteps echoed when the family was alone, doors opened of their own accord, and shadows stretched in unnatural shapes across the walls. The children whispered of faces appearing at windows, of voices calling them into dark corners. Neighbors attempted intervention, but the house refused all efforts. One night, the Fletchers vanished completely, dinner uneaten, beds still warm, no trace beyond the footprints that led into the parlor. The town collectively agreed to forget them, though the hollow house continued to loom, a monument of fear. By the time Elias Harrow arrived, the legend was well established. The townsfolk warned him, cautioning against curiosity that might cost him everything. He ignored them, his pride outweighing the whispered fears of old men and women. Yet unbeknownst to him, the house remembered. Every plank, every warped board, every lingering scent of decay seemed alive, observing, waiting. Even those who had never entered felt its presence. Children refused to pass the lane at night, and grown men hurried past without glancing at the crooked roof. Only Elias, stubborn and reckless, chose to step across the threshold. And the house reacted. The first night had barely passed when he returned, changed in ways subtle but unmistakable. His eyes were wider, darker. His hands trembled when he spoke of the sounds inside. He whispered of walls that breathed and doors that shifted positions, of voices that called to him in rooms where no one could possibly be. The townsfolk listened, uneasy, as he recounted each detail with a fervor that made some doubt his mind, though none doubted the fear in his voice. Marrow's End, a town that prided itself on resilience, began to accept a chilling truth. The hollow house was more than mere architecture. It was a presence, a sentinel, a predator hidden behind wood and stone, and those who entered did so at their own peril. By the next evening, Elias's obsession had grown. He spoke of returning, of discovering the secrets the house held, and the villagers whispered that, like the Fletchers before him, he was no longer merely a man. He was prey. Elias Harrow's obsession with the hollow house deepened with every passing day. The villagers of Marrow's End spoke of him in hushed tones, their fear mingled with curiosity. What had once been amusement at his pride had now become dread, for the man who had boldly entered the cursed home returned visibly altered, as though a shadow had clung to his very being. He spent hours at the threshold, gazing up at the house's ragged roof, listening for the faintest sound of movement inside. His boots, once sturdy and sure, now trembled when he walked the streets. His eyes darted to empty windows, expecting some presence to watch him from within. Even his hands shook, as he recounted to anyone who would listen the noises he had heard. Soft footsteps pacing above his head, whispers that called his name, doors that opened when he was not near. The townsfolk, who had previously mocked his claims as flights of imagination, began to notice subtle changes. Children claimed that when Elias passed them in the street, a chill followed in his wake. Farmers reported that the air seemed heavier where he lingered, the wind carrying faint echoes of the Hollow House's silence. Even Samuel Kitt, once dismissive, crossed himself when the man approached, muttering that he had seen a darkness in Elias's eyes that no sunlight could touch. Elias himself did not comprehend the depth of his transformation. He had entered the house seeking proof of superstition, and instead he had found fascination and terror in equal measure. Every night he returned to the Hollow House, each visit leaving him more pale, more hollowed, more distant. He sketched the crooked windows and warped door frames obsessively, claiming that the angles shifted when he was not looking. Townsfolk who dared peek at his drawings reported that they seemed alive, as though the house itself had pressed itself onto the paper. He spoke rarely of what he had seen inside, and when he did, he whispered in broken sentences, as though the words themselves were not meant to be uttered. The walls, they breathe. The ceilings move. They watch, he said once to old Thomas Greaves, who shook his head and clutched his hammer, unsure whether to pity or fear the man. Even at the tavern, Elias's presence grew unsettling. Widow Mallory, who had seen more than any of them, remarked quietly to those nearby, "He is no longer Elias Harrow. That house, it has claimed him already. Each night it takes a piece, and each day he loses more." By the end of the week, whispers in Morrow's End had transformed into warnings. Children avoided the lane entirely, and grown men would not meet Elias's gaze. His obsession had isolated him completely, yet he persisted, returning to the Hollow House as though drawn by a force invisible to the rest of the world. The townsfolk began to understand what they had long feared. The Hollow House did not simply consume the curious, it reshaped them, bending their minds and spirits to its will. And Elias Harrow, once a man of stubborn pride, had become the first of many to experience its relentless hunger in modern memory. Elias Harrow's descent into obsession did not go unnoticed, and by the third week after his first night in the Hollow House, the villagers of Morrow's End had begun to speak in guarded whispers about his condition. He no longer moved with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Instead, his gait was slow and measured, his eyes darting to every shadow as though the walls themselves would step forward. One stormy evening, the tavern filled with the usual mix of laborers and townsfolk, though the air was thick with a tension no one could shake. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, wind howling through the skeletal streets. Elias entered, lantern in hand, though the light seemed faint against the darkness clinging to him. The room went still, conversations halting mid-sentence as all eyes turned toward him. He did not sit immediately. Instead, he walked to the center of the room, fingers brushing the edge of a table as if seeking support. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, uneven, and carried a weight that silenced even the murmuring children. "I heard them. The Fletchers. They are not gone. The house holds them still." A collective shiver ran through the room. Some gasped, others clutched their mugs tighter, though none dared speak. "The voices, they call me from the walls. I saw the shadows of their faces moving behind the windows. They are trapped and waiting, and the house, it hungers still." Old Thomas Greaves, who had once warned Elias, muttered, "You should have stayed away. The house does not feed on men, it feasts on their minds." Elias shook his head, sweat beading on his brow despite the cold. "I cannot leave it be. I must know what lies within. I must see them, even if I do not return the same man." The tavern fell silent. Outside, the storm rattled the shutters, and rain pattered against the wooden roof, echoing like footsteps in the minds of those who listened. No one moved to stop him. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps resignation. Perhaps they understood that Elias Harrow had already been claimed, in part, by the Hollow House. For hours he spoke, describing the small details others had dismissed as imagination, rooms that changed shape, floors that groaned even when empty, and ceilings that seemed to shift when he looked away. Those who heard him noted a tremor in his hands and a darkness beneath his eyes that had not been there before. Even Widow Mallory, whose years had made her almost immune to superstition, confessed later that she felt a chill whenever Elias spoke, as though the house itself had reached beyond the lane to brush against them all. By the end of the night, Elias made a decision. He would return to the Hollow House, this time not merely to test its silence, but to uncover its secrets. The villagers watched him leave into the storm, lantern light flickering and shadows twisting around him, a man straddling the line between the living and the darkness that awaited him. Marrow's End slept uneasily that night, and many whispered prayers for a man who had dared to tempt what no human should. The storm had passed, leaving the streets slick with rain and littered with broken leaves. Elias Harrow walked toward the Hollow House as though drawn by an invisible chain. Each step was heavy with purpose, his lantern casting long, trembling shadows across the crooked boards and sagging windows of the mansion. No one followed him. No one dared. The villagers remained behind locked doors, their windows shuttered, listening to the wind that moaned through the skeletal trees lining Ashwood Lane. Yet even in the distance, the Hollow House seemed alive, its dark silhouette pressing against the twilight sky, waiting. Elias entered through the open door. The hinges groaned under his touch, a sound like a long, hollow sigh. The air inside was thick and pungent, a mixture of mildew and decay, but also something subtler, almost alive. It carried the faint odor of smoke, as though the house had once been inhabited by unseen occupants who never truly left. He moved carefully through the parlor, noting the sheets over the furniture, the dust thick on the floor, and the single silver fork gleaming on the dining table. Each object seemed to pulse faintly in the lantern light, as though aware of his presence. Ascending the staircase, he followed the trail of his own footsteps from nights past. The upper hall stretched before him, dark and silent, the closed door at the far end waiting like a sentinel. From behind it came the familiar whisper, a name almost carried on the wind. He froze, heart hammering, and listened. "They are calling," he whispered to himself, barely audible. "The Fletchers, they are here." He reached the door and placed his hand on the knob. The metal was cold, biting against his skin. He took a deep breath and opened it. Inside, the room was empty, or so it seemed. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching unnaturally along the walls. A chill ran down his spine as the door clicked shut behind him. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the creak of the floorboards beneath his boots. Then he saw it, the faint shimmer of movement at the far side of the room. Shapes emerged, dark and indistinct, flickering as though caught between one world and another. He stepped closer, heart pounding, the lantern trembling in his hand. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, calling him by name, urging him forward. Elias Harrow had come seeking answers, and now the Hollow House was ready to give them, on its own terms. If you were in Elias's place, would you dare open the door? Could you step into a house everyone feared, knowing you might never return the same? Tell us what you would do in the comments below. The townsfolk of Merrow's End awoke the next morning to an emptiness that felt heavier than usual. The sun rose weak and pale, casting a gray light across Ashwood Lane, but Elias Harrow did not emerge. No lantern swayed at the threshold, no figure returned from the shadow of the Hollow House. The village gathered at the tavern, murmuring anxiously. Widow Mallory pressed her hands together, her lips tight with worry. Samuel Kitt spoke little, his youthful bravado replaced by silent fear. Even old Thomas Greaves, who had warned Elias from the beginning, looked grim. They went to the house. Its doors were ajar, its windows still dark and unwelcoming. Stepping inside, they found the rooms undisturbed. Dust lay undisturbed on the furniture, the silver fork still gleaming on the dining table, but there was no sign of Elias. No footprints, no dropped items, nothing to suggest where he had gone. It was as though he had vanished into the very air, swallowed whole by the shadows that lingered there. The sheriff arrived, a stout man with a skeptical mind. He searched every room, tapping floorboards, pushing open closets, even looking beneath the creaking staircases, but he found nothing. His report to the town was curt. Elias Harrow had disappeared without a trace. Rumors, of course, spread quickly. Some claimed they had seen the lantern flicker in the upper windows after midnight, as though Elias's spirit wandered among the shadows. Others insisted that his voice could be heard, whispering in the wind, carried along Ashwood Lane to the ears of anyone brave enough or foolish enough to listen. Children refused to pass the house, and grown men hurried along the road, eyes fixed on the ground. A week later, those who had once laughed at Elias's pride spoke only in hushed tones of the Hollow House's appetite. It had claimed him, they said, just as it had claimed the Fletchers. The building itself seemed to breathe, its walls pressing in invisibly upon the town, a predator satisfied with another meal. Months passed, but the disappearance left a wound in Merrow's End. Travelers who came to the town avoided Ashwood Lane, sensing the unease that clung to the street like mist. Some claimed that at night a lantern could still be seen moving inside the house, and that a man's whisper drifted down the lane on the wind, calling out to those who dared listen too closely. Elias Harrow's fate became legend, and the Hollow House's hunger became a cautionary tale. No one spoke of it lightly, for to do so was to risk drawing its attention. The house waited, patient and eternal, for the next soul brave or foolish enough to enter. Merrow's End returned to its quiet existence, but the memory of Elias Harrow lingered, a reminder that some curiosity is better left untested. And the Hollow House remained, dark, silent, and watchful, a sentinel of fear whose appetite had not yet been satiated. Years passed in Merrow's End, yet the Hollow House remained a constant, looming presence at the end of Ashwood Lane. Its blackened clapboards and sagging roof had weathered countless storms, but no time could dull the fear it inspired. Children grew up hearing whispers of Elias Harrow and the Fletchers, and adults still crossed themselves when they walked past the old mansion. Some claimed the house seemed to breathe, its windows reflecting shadows that moved independently of wind or sun. On certain nights, townsfolk swore they could hear the faint echo of footsteps pacing along the upper floors, though no one dared investigate. Others swore they saw the glow of a lantern flicker in the darkness, moving from window to window, as though Elias, or what he had become, wandered endlessly within. The tavern, once filled with laughter, became quieter over the years. Even Widow Mallory, whose years had made her accustomed to ghostly tales, spoke less of the Hollow House, only shaking her head when reminded. The younger generation, though skeptical at first, learned quickly that the stories were not to be mocked. The disappearance of Elias Harrow and the previous vanishings had left scars no amount of explanation could erase. Occasionally, travelers passing through Merrow's End would glimpse the house from the main road and feel an inexplicable chill. Some of them whispered of seeing a shadowed figure in the upper windows or hearing a faint voice carried by the wind, though the locals said nothing, offering only a curt warning. Don't linger there. Some things you do not want to meet. Despite the years, the Hollow House continued to inspire fascination and dread in equal measure. Scholars and thrill-seekers would sometimes come to the town, attempting to uncover its history or confront the supernatural, only to leave shaken or silent, their curiosity replaced by unease. Who entered the Hollow House boldly and returned, if he returned at all, forever changed. His obsession, his whispered accounts, and his final disappearance became a cautionary story repeated around hearths, in taverns, and in the hushed corners of homes. The Hollow House, for all its decay, had outlasted them all. Its walls held secrets too vast for any one person to comprehend, and its hunger was never sated. Townsfolk learned to respect its presence, giving it a wide berth and speaking of it only in whispers. Even now, travelers who pass Ashwood Lane are said to feel a weight upon their shoulders, a gaze from darkened windows, and a chill in the wind that whispers a name, Elias Harrow. The house waits, patient and eternal, ready for the next soul brave or foolish enough to enter. Imagine standing at the edge of Ashwood Lane, staring at the Hollow House. Would you dare walk closer, or would fear hold you back? Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us if you've ever encountered a place that felt alive with secrets. Decades passed after Elias Harrow's disappearance, yet the Hollow House remained as it had always been, ominous, silent, and patient. Merrow's End carried the memory of the vanished men and families like a shadow trailing every street. Parents warned their children never to stray too far, never to glance at the windows along Ashwood Lane, for the house had an appetite that no one could measure, and a patience that as though he wandered the upper floors, bound to the mansion by some unyielding force. Others swore the glow of a lantern could still be glimpsed in the windows, moving slowly from room to room, marking the path of a restless spirit. The town endured, but no one forgot. The Hollow House had claimed not only the body of Elias Harrow, but also his mind and pride. He had entered seeking knowledge, daring to challenge superstition, and in return he became a cautionary tale, a living warning etched into the memories of all who heard it. It is said that those who approach Ashwood Lane today feel the house watching them. The air grows heavy, the shadows lengthen, and the silence is interrupted by faint, inexplicable creaks that seem to follow even the most cautious visitor. Some who lingered too long report whispers calling their names, voices from the past that belong to neither friend nor stranger. Elias's story became part of the town's history, a reminder untouched. The Hollow House does not simply exist, it waits, ever patient, ever observant, feeding on curiosity and daring. Those who enter may never return unchanged, or at all. And so I recount this tale to you now, not as a warning merely for the sake of fear, but as a truth gathered over decades. Some stories are not meant for amusement or disbelief. They are preserved to remind us of the thin line between curiosity and danger, between bravery and foolishness. If you have listened to this story closely, remember it well. Remember Elias Harrow and the fate that befell him, and remember the Hollow House, waiting still at the end of Ashwood Lane, patient and eternal. Thank you for joining me for the story of Elias Harrow and the Hollow House. If you enjoyed this tale, stay close, subscribe for more horror shows, and share your own experiences with strange or terrifying events. Who knows, perhaps your story will be the next one I recount.